Hello and a very warm welcome to everyone to EWJ podcast, where we sit with educators across the globe to discuss up-to-date approaches of the theme in focus, followed by some actionable tips and secrets of the trade. That will be inspiring for the listeners and help them to enhance their teaching and learning experience. Your host today is Maria Zahir, and in this episode, we are talking about portfolio-based assessment. Is it a way forward? And today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Daniel Waller. Hi, Dr. Daniel Waller. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We're really glad to be here.
So those learners who don't know Dr. Waller as yet, he is head of School of Humanities, Language and Global Studies. He has a strong interest in English language teaching and assessment, and has published on using corpora for teaching grammar, teaching lexis, and the role of meta-discourse markers in establishing language learners' profiles at different levels of common European framework of reference for language. He has also supervised PhD students in the areas such as language assessment, second language acquisition, intercultural awareness, and lexis. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wallace. So we will jump on without further ado to our topic, and that is assessments. So in general, post-pandemic has changed the way language teachers, so to speak, or language institutes approach towards assessments. So would you like to shed light on it?
Yeah, I think the pandemic, I think it accelerated things. I think we potentially would have got to this point, but it would have taken much longer. And what I mean by accelerating it is the use of a much wider range of tools for assessment, particularly kind of digital ones, has kind of come now into, I think, most areas of education. Certainly in universities, it's become much more common. Yes. And so there's two things there that really changed. One is that the staff, the teachers became much more savvy, much more knowledgeable about the kind of tools and the kind of things that were available because they had to very quickly. And that's developing. You know, people have carried on engaging with it, and the things have changed. Yeah. Institutions as well kind of looked at it and said, this is a good way of doing it. Why would we go back to doing what we'd done previously? But I think the second point there, and a really important one, is that learners also learned how to engage with these things. Yeah. And that's also really important, because if you're going to have assessment, the key thing is that learners have to understand how to use it. I mean, it's very important that staff know how to, and teachers know how to do it, but it's essential that the learners know how to do it. Yeah. So I think it forced us in down avenues much faster than we would have gone down previously. It forced people to think about what they were assessing, why they were assessing it, and how they were assessing it. So again, to go back to kind of universities, some courses would have previously had very large exams, would have sat students down in the exam room and run a big test. And the pandemic sort of took that away. So you had the introduction of, seen papers, of things like open book exams, which were sort of less policed, or even people just moving away from that entirely and saying, well, no, we'll do something different. And then the last thing I think I'd probably say is it's created the potential for much more individualized learning and assessment, because now that we have tools that potentially allow for more individualized responses and ways of accessing it by the teachers, I think that's another dimension that's come along. And I do think we would have got to this point, but I don't think we would have got here as quickly.
True. I think it was an extra push for us because it was already 21st century, isn't it? It was already the need of the hour to think beyond what we were already practicing at the moment in the education sector. So with this
Oh, for sure.
assessment change and everything came the worry of rigor in the assessment. So lots of online teachers are, and the think of predicted grades that happened because of the Cambridge had to, unable to have students sit for in-person exams, and they had to go on predicted grades and come up to that level on going through school assessments and giving them the final grades. So then the question arises that was there any rigor in that? Was there any reliability of the grades that made up to the mark of that assessment result? So would you like to say something about that?
I mean, it would depend, I suppose, on the institution that did it and how they went about doing it. I think for the large part, teachers, certainly in the institution I work, used an awful lot of evidence to arrive at things like predicted grades. So, for example, there were different measures. There was looking at cohort performance and how whether a module that runs this year, how it performed compared to how a module run the previous year. We also, in our situation, were very lucky because we were able to pull, for many of our learners, we were able to pull their previous performance and sort of look and see, well, how do they generally perform on these types of assessments? How do they generally perform in these sort of situations? And I suppose the other thing that was fortuitous for us was we had semester one under our belt. So students who'd started in September, by the time the first lockdown started in sort of around March 2020, we already had quite a lot of information about those students, which helped us to make decisions. Now, that, again, whenever you're making a predicted decision, I would argue that often, given the circumstances and the time, teachers are often very good at making predictions about how their learners are going to do if they're given the tools and the time and the resources to do it. And I think in some ways, the situation we found ourselves in has made perhaps some teachers aware of actually, that their judgments are generally quite sound. Or where they're not and where they're challenged, to sort of think about, well, what is the evidence I'm drawing on here? So, I think there are potential sort of halo effects. There are sort of issues around some of it, but again, no form of assessment is ever going to be perfect. You are always going to have a trade-off of some.
So there's always a bias around it. Sometimes they say, even if they are hand marked by a teacher, there is always a question of bias, of rigor and reliability of the grades.
I mean, even if you sit people down in a timed standardized examination, the students who will do best in a timed standardized examination are the students who are good at timed standardized assessments.
True. So there's lots, it's not just it's the environment as well, isn't it? The stress around it, the anxiety, everything adds up to the assessment results. So moving forward, do you think, some of us are going back to face-to-face teaching and some of us are still practicing the hybrid style of teaching. So moving forward, do you think the online assessment or the kind of framework that we were following during the pandemic lockdown will continue to see the trend, or it is going down now because of all these factors involved in it?
I think teachers are very pragmatic people, and what they will look at very carefully is what has worked well and what's been very difficult to carry out. And if something has worked well, and generally if they feel that it's been a fairer way of working with the learners, of demonstrating what learners can do, teachers will carry on doing it and will push to continue to do it, because they'll say, well, the advantage is there, that this is a better way of doing it than we've done it in the past. That's not to say that, you know, large scale standardized testing or, you know, doing exams or the like is going to vanish. But I think what perhaps the pandemic did was put us in a situation of actually re-evaluating all of that and saying, well, what are we testing and why are we doing it this way? Is there a better way of doing it? And because we've kind of been forced to experiment, we, you know, many teachers will come to the conclusion of actually this is a better way of doing it, and I would rather work this way, provided I can put in the rigor and the, you know, the qualitative, you know, the quality support and assurance around it.
Yeah, true. So with this has come to, there are lots of alternate assessments that have surfaced during this time. They have been lingering around for a long time, but they have now come into the limelight, such as portfolio-based assessments that shows the performance of a student over a period of time. So would you like to give us some more tips or how to accurately design a proper portfolio to have an accurate performance assessment from a student?
I'll do what I can. You know, bear in mind we've only got a limited amount of time.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. Just to overview, anything that our listeners will benefit from in.
And you know that I can talk and talk. And
I
talk.
know that you are the person about assessment. That's why we are sitting today for it.
I mean, the drawback with portfolios has always been that sense that they are sort of somehow fluffy and not a sort of proper form of assessment when compared to a test. But I think that I've always felt that was quite a flawed view of portfolios. Just because you carry out a form of performance-based assessment or assessment over time that is not a standardized examination, it doesn't mean you jettison all the principles of assessment. In fact, you have to apply them much more rigorously. So, you know, there's a lot of work to do around the setting of the task and thinking very carefully about what you're trying to elicit from the task. And people may not, I don't know how experienced people are in assessment, but any assessment should have some kind of test specification. A document that thinks about what am I assessing, what are the, you know, the different objectives that I want to assess through this, why is this the best way of assessing it, how does it fit with the learners and the context that they're in. And it's really important with portfolios that piece of work is undertaken. And then I suppose, so that then comes along with all the quality assurance. You have to have the standardization, you have to have the moderation, you have to make sure that you and colleagues are working with clear criteria, that you communicate those criteria exceptionally well. And that's kind of, I suppose that's probably familiar to most people. The thing that I think most people, or where I see portfolios and that kind of assessment break down in the past is very often in the implementation. So has it been explained to the students? Are the learners clear about what the task is, what they have to do, and the kind of process through which they need to go to do it? And then that process needs to be mirrored in the classroom. The great advantage of this kind of assessment is that if you get it right, you are assessing the things that the students normally do in the classroom.
True. Yeah.
So yeah, it's assessing the kind of work that, you know, that they do as part of their routine, and therefore has a stronger validity. And that's the strength of it. But it requires curriculum time. So, you know, you can't set a portfolio on day one of a course and then on day 100 at the end of the course say, right, give me your portfolios. It will be a disaster. What you have to do is to make sure that the students, there's regular points in the classroom. And when I've used portfolios, it's often been a case of saying, right, everyone, next week, bring your portfolios in. We're going to sit down and have a look at what you're doing, or setting tasks along the way of saying, right, you should all be doing this, and I want you to bring stuff in. And it's very quick and easy to go around a classroom and say, and look and see where people are and what they're doing and who's done something and who hasn't. And keeping it on track, but crucially tying it into the activities of the classroom. Because that's the strength. If you're not going to do that, you might as well set a test.
Yeah, of course, because the, implementation is the key to, I think, anything, executing it the way you have planned, even for a simple teaching lecture or a class, may fall apart if the planning and execution did not marry together. So the staging, of course, has to, so the staging is very important, and how you're assessing and tracking, obviously, it's very important to everything.
Yeah, and you need to tell them. I mean, the other thing that needs to happen at the start is you share the criteria. That you put the criteria, either in an adapted form that learners can work with. In front of them to show them what you're assessing and why, and what goes into it and why it goes into it, so that learners can do that self-assessment as they're going through. And I think having sessions along the way where you ask learners to report back on the criteria and show that they're developing that understanding, because the whole idea of this is that learners are operating on a higher level set of thinking skills, that they are aware of standards and doing work that benefits them and moves them forward. And I think that's absolutely essential. So I think the other thing there is that sharing of the criteria and revisiting the criteria all the way along with learners. I think that's absolutely essential to me.
Also, Dr. Waller, do you think the kind of task that you set up for a portfolio, for example, it's a language classroom, so receptive and productive skills, there should be your own equal weightage to it, or how you want to assess that depends on the teacher's design?
Yeah, again, it comes back to the goals, the aims of the course that they're doing, what's kind of required from those learners. So again, in lots of kind of school settings, it will be all 4 skills. But there'll be other situations where it's only going to be, you might, if you're doing a course with learners on oral presentations, then, you're only going to be assessing, you're only really looking at that. And again, that's a situation where portfolio becomes very, very useful. So, it depends on the situation, and one of the really exciting things about the post-pandemic is that because we're now able to use platforms a lot better, we can capture audio, we can capture video. The range of things that can go into a portfolio can be much more creative than we previously had. And the possibility of interaction, because if there are platforms where a student can put something up and a teacher can go in and sort of review it in real time. Or you can have discussion boards where students co-collaborate on a task. So the range of things that can go into a portfolio is only limited by sort of sitting down and thinking, how am I going to make this work? And then how am I going to assess it?
So it's not as easy as it sounds, because I have plunged into a portfolio-based, performance-based assessment where I asked the students to make pedagogy, and it was a very challenging task for them, and at times hair pulling for me. Why did I take this plunge? But like you said, it was an absolute new level of presenting things. And I was training these new teachers who were going to the market as your own new teachers, like a CELTA course that was run here at my university. And they were learning a skill that if every time in future they had to present a pre-recorded lecture in the school. So Pechakucha was the best way to do it. And they had to learn it through their performance-based portfolio as a final project. So it can be challenging, but it's something that is doable, right? So everything is challenging in the first step.
But I think that, you know, the whole point of the portfolio is the challenge.
Yeah,
It's that idea that, you know, that you want to foster a particular kind of learning or approach to learning, and you want to foster particular behaviors. And you
yeah,
might be working in a context that's completely alien to the learners. They've
true.
never done anything like that.
Yeah,
So you know, it is a very steep learning curve for
yeah,
those students. I would hope when they came to the end of it and what you found, that they were actually much more competent and much more independent about thinking about these kinds of tasks.
yeah,
Because it sounds to me like, you know, you put the support in, and you know, as a teacher, you take a lot of that burden
yes,
of sort of structuring and explaining. But the reward at the end is that you have a group of learners who come away having done something different with a kind of better learner skills
yeah,
for the future.
yeah. So basically, the aim was to equip them with the 21st century skills as a teacher, as a new teacher going into the market. And it's not just about making a PowerPoint and presenting a lesson. It's having more interaction to it, having animation to it, and recording themselves while they are on those slides and saying it. So this we all were worried about this when we went online and teaching, because we knew how to do a PowerPoint, we knew how to teach, but pre-recorder sessions was hard for most of us, right? So to sink in both the abilities was something a 21st century skill was required to be learned at that point. So I thought let's throw that in as a final project. But
I think one of the, if I could just sort of, you know, say something about your network and stuff, one of the really positive things about what you do is bringing teachers together. Because
yes,
when teachers are designing things like portfolios, often, you know, sitting down with other people, working it out, comparing ideas, getting other people's experience. You know, we again, after post-pandemic, we do have many more options for collaboration with other staff. And I think particularly when you're designing, I've never been an advocate of designing assessment on your own.
yes,
It's generally, you know, and I think, you know, portfolios are just another example where
true.
getting that peer feedback
Yeah,
is absolutely essential. I think, you know, the network that you have here, where, you know, teachers have the opportunity to explore and to suggest and collaborate, I think it's absolutely brilliant.
true. Thank you so much, Daniel. So some best tips from your experience to make portfolio-based assessment a success.
Really, the things I think I've probably just sort of outlined, but it's the idea about being rigorous in the design,
Mm-hmm.
you know, setting up the test specification so you know exactly what it is, thinking through very carefully about who your learners are and how you're going to move them from A to B to C to D to the eventual submission of the portfolio, having that clearly defined criteria, and then assigning curriculum time to it. Because if it's worthwhile and it fits with the objectives of what you're doing, then, you know, it's not massively, you know, it's not different from what you should be doing on the course anyway. But that actual dedicated time in the classroom will help move things forward and keep things in check. And I think, and then there are, you know, as I said earlier on, there are always trade-offs. You know, what you get from portfolios in terms of authenticity and sort of positive reinforcement and washback, you know, they're not as practical as large-scale testing.
Yes.
And they're often, you know, and there is a perception that reliability may not be quite as good. Now, again, I don't completely agree with that if you do it
Yes.
properly,
Yeah.
but it's more difficult to demonstrate the reliability sometimes.
Yes.
But I think if you follow those basic steps, that, you know, you will get to, you know, you'll produce portfolios which are valid, reliable, and, you know, are a successful piece of learning, not just assessment.
Yes, and it's authentic as well. Like I said, I couldn't agree more, because I've seen the net result. It was hard going through the process. It is okay, because the success gives you that satisfaction that you achieved what you wanted to, and the outcomes was there, a skill was developed, learners were happy. There is always an anxiousness in the beginning when you introduce something new anyways, or you yourself as a teacher,
Yeah.
having X amount of experience, still tremor, starting something new. But once you get into it, once you get the hang of it, you do succeed. If there are pitfalls here and there, but of course, when you keep on coming back to it stronger than before, it becomes a success, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the other thing, advice is perhaps go into it with a colleague,
Yes.
or at least with someone who's prepared to be a critical friend.
Yes.
So so you've got someone you can bounce ideas off, that you can try things with, and you've got a bit of support for what you're doing, because it's very nerve-wracking, as you said,
Yes.
doing it for the first time. But and not just for you, but for the learners as well. But
Yes.
some of the strongest resistance can come from the learners themselves.
Oh yes. Yes, definitely.
Particularly if they've had a bad portfolio experience.
Yes. So do you think the online portfolio has become way easier for us as teachers as well to track the performance and progress than the hard paper-based copies of a portfolio assessments?
Oh, definitely. I mean, again, I don't know. I mean, when you were here, at UCLan, you
Yes.
probably walked past teachers' offices where they had piles of portfolios
Yes.
outside the doors,
Yeah.
waiting for students to come back and collect.
Yeah, I know.
The amount of paper and things
Yes.
that went into these things was incredible.
Yeah.
But the online one, it's much more instantaneous.
Mm.
It allows much more flexibility in terms of what's submitted. And I think that's that's really positive. And I think the tools are there now. More people have experience, at least with some of the tool, even if not haven't used all of the tool, but the grounding is there for a lot of people.
Yes, true. So it is a total game changer for me, I think. I like this, and it's like I always argued at different platforms and with the different podcasts that I had with other educators across the globe, is that it is time for change. And even assessments needs to be rethink in this way. And I think this is the best way to move forward and approach assessment in a different way. Great. So thank you so much, Dr. Waller. I'm afraid we have come to the end of the podcast. I know we can go on and on for hours on this, but I don't want to bore our listeners anymore, and we will cut short here and probably have you again to shed more light on assessments in our future podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Waller.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure, and it's always lovely to talk to you.
It's pleasure's all ours. Thank you.